Shout with joy to God all the earth.
Sing to the glory of his name.
Offer him glory and praise.
Sing to the glory of his
Sing
name.
to the
Sing to the glory of his
Sing
name.
to the
Sing to the glory of his name.
I love Bible stories. Love Bible stories. I have since I was a kid. Gideon and his 300 men was one of my favorites. But as we grow older, we can look at those stories again and we see things that we may not have seen when we were younger. That's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at Gideon and his mighty men and find out what we can learn from this story. What is it like, for instance, to face overwhelming odds? I mean, odds that are so overwhelming that on paper, there's no victory. You're going to lose this encounter. The overwhelming odds that test your faith to the extent to where you're telling God, please God, no more. I can't do this anymore. Release me from this obstacle, whatever it may be. Some years ago, there was a movie and it was called The 300. The star of that movie was Jerub-Baal. And this film was loosely based on a historic event about King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans versus King Xerxes and his innumerable Persian army. Now, in reality, King Leonidas actually had about 2,000, some historians say 5,000 men. But of all his men, only 300 were Spartans. What's the difference? Historically speaking, the Spartans were the greatest warriors in history. They were born and bred to end you on the battlefield. They were unstoppable, all right? Those were his 300 Spartans. Now, in contrast, King Xerxes of the Persian army, he was said to have had millions of soldiers, but in reality, he had actually about 300,000. But the point isn't the exact numbers in this situation. The point is, this is a historical story about overwhelming odds. It's a historical story about an underdog. There's no way on paper that King Leonidas, even with 2,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 men, could stand against an army of 300,000 soldiers. King Leonidas and his Spartans, they fought valiantly. But in the end of the story, they lost their lives to the overwhelming numbers of the enemy. So why even engage in such battles like this? Glory? Is it honor? Is it pride? The way the story played out is King Leonidas wanted to ensure the king of Persia and his army, if you win this little battle here, this is going to cost you dearly, okay? Your army will be humiliated because it's going to take most of your army to take out my army of a mere 300 Spartans and some additional soldiers. Okay, so they're going to go home humiliated even if they win. King Leonidas wanted to make sure, King Xerxes, you've been in a fight if you come against us. And we've got thousands more Spartans back at home. You sure you want this battle? Now, Hollywood has made a fortune with stories about the underdog. Anyone familiar with the Rocky franchise, Rocky Balboa? Didn't everybody he fight, weren't they always bigger than him, stronger than him, younger than him? And he got through with just sheer heart, right? Or how about Star Wars? One of my favorites, right? Star Wars, you've got Luke Skywalker and the ragtag rebellion against the entire galactic empire. On paper, this just doesn't work, does it? In the Bible, there was this story about Gideon and his 300 men. This story tells us about the overwhelming odds that God called the Israelites to face. But there is one gigantic difference between King Leonidas and his 300 men and Gideon and his 300 men as well. The difference is God. The difference is God, and it was a difference of life and death. It was a difference of victory and defeat. Our story starts off in Judges 6, 1 through 10. Rustin read most of it, where we see Israel in sin yet again and suffering the God-ordained consequences for their sin. We see that in Judges chapter 6, verse 1 through 2. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian 7 years. And the hand of Midian overpowered Israel, and because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves the dens that are in the mountains, and the caves, and the strongholds. What just happened here? Israel's in sin. Here comes Midian. Midian oppresses Israel. So what does Israel do? They leave their own homes. That's how oppressed they are. That's how afraid they are. They leave their own homes and move into the caves and the mountains. Okay, that's what's going on right here. Now, some people will ask, if the question goes out, why does God just always seem so mean in the Old Testament? I got that question just a few weeks ago. Always punishing people. That's what it seems like God is doing. That's like observing a child being punished, but never inquiring why the child is being punished. Haven't we seen that? Or haven't you experienced that as a parent? You're punishing your child, and here comes someone from the outside. Oh, how could you do such a thing to this poor, innocent child? Mom, Dad, how do you look at that person? You have no idea what I'm dealing with. No idea what I'm dealing with. But it's like inquiring why, not inquiring why they're being punished. It assumes the good behavior of the child. That's what it does. It assumes the good behavior of the child rather than a possibly just punishment for a wayward child. Contrast this with Israel. Israel was God's chosen nation. God picked them out amongst all of the nations on the earth. You will be my people. You will represent me. Okay? God, the simple deal was obey me, obey my commandments. That's it. And what did Israel do? Oh, by the way, within that arrangement of obeying me, God protected Israel. God allowed them to thrive. No one could touch Israel. They could not be beaten even against overwhelming odds. But what did Israel do? Israel continuously disobeyed God and broke his commandments. They broke the covenant they had with God. Thus, in this occasion, God used the Midianites to punish his wayward child, Israel. That's what we see going on here. So that sets up our story, and now we're going to meet Gideon. Who is this Gideon guy? We see in Judges chapter 6, verse 11 through 12. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." This is the first appearance we see of Gideon. And what does the angel do? The angel calls Gideon a mighty man of valor. This is what God sees when he sees Gideon. He continues by telling him to free all of Israel from Midian. You got to get inside of Gideon's head right now. What's he doing? He's beating out wheat, hiding it from the Midianites, the oppressing army. And he's being told right now he's going to free Israel from Midian, and he's got to be looking behind him. Are you talking to someone behind me? Me? Do this? Are you crazy? This is insane. See, in Gideon's eyes, he sees something very differently than what God sees in him. And isn't that the case with all of us? But in this case, unlike King Leonidas of Sparta, Gideon was a nobody. I'm not calling him a nobody. Gideon called himself a nobody. Gideon did not share God's confidence in himself. We see that in Judges chapter 6, verse 15 through 16. And he said to him, this is Gideon talking, "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh." Manasseh is one of the tribes of Israel. "My clan is the weakest in the tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." And the Lord said to him, "But I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man." One man. Sounds like God has chosen the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, right? He's chosen the bottom of the barrel to rescue Israel. Why not? Why not pick a mighty warrior to free Israel? Someone more like King Leonidas, who was not just the king of the Spartans, he himself was a Spartan as well. He was a warrior king. Why not pick someone like that to free Israel? God has a plan that Gideon just can't see right now. God will use Gideon to finally rescue the Israelites after 7 long years of torture from the Midianites. But before God can begin this plan, okay, there's a statement that needs to be made. What statement is that? The false idols must come down. Belief in the one true God must be restored to the identity, the very fabric, the very foundation of Israel. Israel is God's chosen nation. They represent him. He protects them. But they broke that by worshiping false gods. And so those false idols must come down. Here Israel is crying out for rescue, while the pagan idols that they built are still standing. This is not going to happen. So we see in Judges 6:25 through 27. That night the Lord said to him, take your father's bull and the second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal that your father has. This is God talking to Gideon. And cut down the Asherah that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on the top of the stronghold here, with stones laid in due order. Then take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah that you shall cut down. So Gideon took men of his servants and did as the Lord had told him. But because he was too afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day, he did it by night. Let's recap here. What do we know about Gideon so far? Beating wheat in the winepress, hiding it from Midian. Why? Because the Midianites will come and just take the wheat. So he's doing that to hide it from them, and he's too afraid to tear down the altar of Baal. Who's he afraid of? He's afraid of his own family and the men of the town. This is the mighty man of valor we just met, right? Seems to me a big contrast. This guy is scared. But why is Gideon so scared? Why? Why would an Israelite of God's chosen nation be afraid to tear down a pagan idol in the midst of an Israelite encampment? Why would he be so afraid of that? When his fellow Israelites found out what happened, okay, and they found out who did it, here's what we see. Judges 6:29 through 30. And they said to one another, the people of the town, who has done this thing? And after they had searched and inquired, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing. Then the men of the town said to Joash, bring out your son that he may die. For he has broken down the altar of Baal and cut down the Asherah beside it. This is why Gideon was so afraid. Right here. He knew his fellow Israelites would kill him for destroying the altar to a pagan god. How depraved had Israel become to desire to kill one of their own for committing an act that they all should have shared in? All of them should have been tearing down this altar, let alone allowing it to be built in the first place, right? But I want you to notice something else. Gideon built a brand new altar to the one true God. They ignored that, didn't they? They totally ignored that. They recognized Baal's altar was torn down. Now let's kill him. Only Gideon's father, whom the altar belonged to begin with, only Gideon's father prevented the crowd from killing Gideon. So we have an Israel that is so wicked, still so wicked, but God is showing his mercy and finally giving them relief from the Midianites. It is amazing to me to see God's love and his forgiveness in the face of such unrepentant evil. Here God is raising up a champion for Israel, a champion to free them, and they're trying to kill him before he even gets started. But fast forward a little bit, and the great battle is taking shape. What's going on here? The enemy, which included the Midianites, but the Midianite army also included, guess who? They included Amalekites, and they included others from the east. That's what we read. They've all gathered together. Likewise, Gideon has put out the call to all of Israel, all the tribes. Okay, he puts out a call to Manasseh, his own tribe. He puts out a call to Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali, and others. A battle is coming. We're finally going to be free from the Midianites. Join one, join all, come together. Let's get this done. God is with us. But keep this in mind before we go too far. Gideon is not a king. He's not a great general either, right? All he was doing when we met him was beating out wheat, hiding in the winepress. He was the least in his family and part of the weakest clan in Manasseh. Gideon needed some reassurance for himself, because it's one thing for Gideon to defy Israel and put his own life at risk like he did tearing down the statue of Baal. It's a total other thing for him to recruit hundreds, thousands of Israelites to come in for this big battle, and they lose their lives as well. Now it's not just him on the line, it's everybody. This is the responsibility of a leader. Anyone you get to join your cause, their life is at risk now as well. Gideon needed some reassurance. God, are you sure you're with us? And we see that reassurance given in Judges 6, 36 through 40. So if you get a chance, read that on your own. It's the fleece, the story of the dry and the wet fleece. All total, Gideon had finally amassed his army. 32,000 Israelite men answered the call. 32,000. That's a big army, isn't it? 32,000 men came a-running. We're ready, Gideon. We're with you, but they're still outnumbered. The enemy, the Midianite army, still outnumbers Israel at their 32,000 men. But God is with them, right? God is with them. But God also knows Israel very well. He knows them very well, and God decides this is still too many. 32,000 men, yeah, you're outnumbered, but 32,000 is still too many. So here's what happens. Judges 7, 2 through 3. The Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Now, therefore, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home and hurry away from Mount Gilead. Then 22,000 of the people returned and 10,000 remained. What is this saying? 22,000 people left because they were scared. This part bugs me mentally. This part just bugs me. You got 32,000 people. You decide, okay, I'm scared. I'm just going to return home now, leaving 10,000. What do you think is going to happen to that 10,000? The enemy army is going to walk right over them, and they're going to come and get you. Why would they leave the 22,000 alone? To stoke up another rebellion later. So these folks would rather die in their caves, huddled up, scared, than on the battlefield with their sword in hand, taking out as many as they can. These were no Spartans. These were no Spartans. They returned home. They were scared. At 32,000, again, they were vastly outnumbered. Now at 10,000, this is ridiculous. On paper, this makes no sense. But why is God doing this? Why? For the same reason he didn't use a great king or a great general to free Israel. He doesn't want Israel to ever think that they saved themselves. God does not want them to think, or to ever forget, rather, that God is the one who saved them. God is the one who forgave them, and God is the one who protects them. He does not want them to forget this. So they've got 10,000 men, but guess what? 10,000 is still too many. Way too many. So God is making his point clear. So the 10,000 go down to the river and they drink. And I'm just kind of glossing over this. But God dismisses another 9,700 soldiers, leaving, guess how many? 300 to the man. Not 300 plus others like King Leonidas had, 300 full stop. What can Gideon do with 300 men? They could annoy the army, maybe, but they're going to die. They could shout curses from afar and then run away, but they're still going to get got. What can Gideon do with 300 men? Guess what? That's the wrong question. That is the wrong question. The correct question is, what can God do with 300 men? That's the question. This story is going to tell us later what God can do with 300 men. And we're also going to find out just how many men the enemy had, so we can understand why Israel was so afraid from what they saw. God was working his plan, though. This whole time, God's working his plan, and he instills fear into the collected Midianite forces through their dreams. They're having nightmares about being defeated by this guy named Gideon. They've never even met this guy. Remember, he is the least in his family from the weakest clan of Manasseh. But they're having nightmares about him fighting them and him winning. When Gideon found out what was going on with the power of God, he became even more energized. We might be able to win this. So what did Gideon do? He and his 300 men, they surrounded the Midianite forces with covered torches and horns. And at Gideon's command, they blew the trumpets and uncovered the torches, and they shouted, "For the Lord and for Gideon." What happened next? Judges 7:21 through 23. Every man stood in his place around the camp, and all the army ran. They cried out and fled. When they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army. And the army fled as far as Beth-Shittah toward Zererah, as far as the border of Abel-Meholah by Tabbath. And the men of Israel were called out from Naphtali and from Asher and from all Manasseh, and they pursued after Midian. Question: what is the absolute easiest way to win a fight? Make your opponent too scared. Make them too scared, too afraid to fight, let alone think straight. All the Midianite forces got up, scared to death, blindly lashing out, and killed each other in the process. The survivors ran, and the rest of the Israelite clans, many of who were sent home earlier, remember them? Yeah, they're back now, and they caught them and took them out as well. Okay? Because it's easy to win a fight when the enemy is already running. You want to know the best way to beat Mike Tyson in a fight? You make sure he's in a coma. That's the best way to make sure you win. This had nothing to do, however, with the military strategy of Gideon or of Israel. This had everything to do with the power of God and the faith of Gideon in the power of God. So how about the numbers? I told you earlier, we're going to look at some numbers. We find out how many the enemy had in Judges chapter 8, verse 10. Now, Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their army, about 15,000 men, all who were left of all the army of the people of the east, for there had fallen 120,000 men who drew the sword. What is this telling us? Army of the east. Remember, the Midianite army contained the Midianites, the Amalekites, and the people from the east. This is them. These are their leaders. Zebah and Zalmunna were their leaders, and they ran. With their 15,000 men, they ran. So let's do some math here. How many fled? According to this passage, 15,000 soldiers fled. They ran away immediately. How many died on the battlefield surrounded by Gideon and his 300 men? 120,000 soldiers died. So when you add these two together, make sure you carry the decimal point correctly, and you make sure you put the one above on top. You end up with, guess how many? 30 billion soldiers on the battlefield that they fought, right? That were defeated, right? There's something wrong with my math? A little bit? 30 billion? Or was it 135,000 people in their army? 135,000. Okay? Might as well have been 30 billion to the Israelites, right? Because how many did the Israelites have total? 32,000. How many times does 32,000 go into 135,000? 4 times, and 7,000 to spare. The enemy army was over 4 times bigger than Israel at their most, at their biggest, at 32,000. But Israel ended up having how many? 300. So how does 300 people, 300 soldiers fight 135,000? Well, let's do this on paper. Each of Gideon's 300 men would have to take out 450 of the enemy army by themselves. By themselves. You know how difficult that is? I had the youth group one morning. We were looking at stories like this and trying to figure out how this could win, how we could win a battle like this just on our own. I had them grab a pool stick. We got a pool table down there. Grab the pool sticks, but don't hold the handle, the thicker part. Hold the smaller part with the thicker part on the other end, and so it feels a little bit heavier, like a sword. And then just simply jab out as many times as you can. And, some of the youth group, they're, this is easy. It's easy. I can get two pool cues and do it. And you see them starting off like this. Okay, great. And they're just taking out the enemy. What happened when they got to 50? You saw them, it's going down now because it's getting heavy. Okay? Their shoulders are not built up yet to do this. By the time any of them got to 100, you see them just doing this sweeping motion here, like a weed whacker, It's not going to work on paper. You're going to get tired, and every man you don't take out is going to go to yet another member of your army to take out instead. So now their 450 is now 550, however many you missed. It doesn't work on paper. The victory just doesn't happen. They would have cried out, God, we have a leader who is what? Gideon, who's the least in his family and from the weakest clan. Our forces are ridiculously small compared to the might and the size of our enemy. But the key factor here is God. When he said, but I will be with you. We read past that earlier. Judges 6, verse 16. I will be with you. What does that mean? That means you've already won. I'm with you. King Leonidas, he had his sword. His sword was impressive. He had his skill. His skill was amazing. And he had his courage. His courage was like none other. But every Spartan with him died. Every Spartan died. But Gideon had God. And because he had God, not only did Israel win the battle, but they also didn't lose a single man. This is an impossible victory, folks. Impossible victory against overwhelming odds. This is what it looks like with God in our lives. The overwhelming odds against us versus God. Who wins? God does. Every single time. Think about King David versus Goliath. He wasn't even king yet. He was a little boy. Who wins? David does. Why? Because of God. Think about Israel versus the invincible walls of Jericho. Who wins? Israel. Why? Because of God. It's always going to come down to God. This is just what God does. He takes that which is lowly and humble, and he can use us to defeat any army. Did you know that after this victory of Gideon and his 300 men, Israel begged Gideon to become their new leader? It's amazing, isn't it? Earlier in the story, we read that they were trying to kill Gideon for tearing down the statue of Baal. Now they're asking, please be our leader. God took Gideon by the hand and took him on a journey where he went from the least in Israel to this great general, this great commander that they all wanted at this point to lead Israel. He used a nobody, but because of God, he became a somebody. We face our own overwhelming odds in life, don't we? If you're not a believer, you face all kinds of things that come against you, some type of oppression, obstacles, things in your life that just keep beating down on you. And you find any way you can to cope with it. If you are a believer, guess what? You face those same obstacles, those same things that beat us down as well. But because we have victory in Jesus, we know what happens in the end. We face it differently. We face it while still praising God. And that tells us, you know something? We can do this. No matter how hard things get, God is going to pull us through this. Even if we don't make it through this life, we know what's coming. We know that we get eternity. And so it's okay. It's okay. So all these obstacles that come against us end up just becoming things that could distract us. We don't let that happen, do we? We don't let that happen. All these become just distractions. We've got to get it out the way and keep praising our God through the good times and the bad times. Jesus gives us marching orders because of how we see things, because we know now that all these things that oppress us are just obstacles that distract us from our faith. Jesus says, now I've got a job for you to do. What is that job? We see it in Matthew 28, verse 19. Jesus tells us to go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. What's going on here? Jesus is saying, hey, you know how you see things now? How you understand that everything that comes against you, everything that beats you down, is trying to distract you, but you're so focused that you're living with this inner joy. No matter what's going on around you, you have this inner peace, knowing that whatever happens, we have eternity with God. Now we have to tell others. We've got to let everybody else know. This is how things are when you're with God. We've already won the battle. But this passage says what? Make disciples of all nations? That's an impossible task, isn't it? Tell the whole world about Jesus? What if they don't like us? What if they ignore or reject the things that we're trying to say? What if they get us fired from our jobs or have us persecuted or imprisoned just because we're trying to make disciples of all nations? I'm not imagining this. This is already happening, and it's been happening for centuries. Just read about the first century church. But notice, Jesus tells us what? In this same passage, I am with you always. What does that mean? And doesn't that sound familiar? Didn't God tell Gideon, I will be with you? What did it mean to Gideon? It meant to Gideon, you're going to win. I'm with you, you're going to win. What does it mean when Jesus tells us the same thing, I will be with you? It means you're going to win. Matter of fact, the battle has already been won. Jesus sealed the victory when he died and was resurrected. Jesus sealed that victory. God does not want us to rely on ourselves. He wants us to rely on him and his plan. He wants us to praise him when things are good, and he wants us to praise him when things are not so good. Jesus did not come to ensure that we have a happy and comfortable life. This is not about our best life now. He came to eternally save sinners, each and every one of us, who have put their faith and trust in him. This requires soldiers who are willing to fight. This requires soldiers willing to stand by God's word. And what I mean by God's word is our mission. Tell the world who he is and that this victory over sin has already been won. God took Gideon out of his humble comfort zone and used Gideon to accomplish something great. What comfort zone is God taking us out of? What overwhelming odds does God want us to face so we all can learn to trust him more, remembering that he is with us? If you have yet to join the winning army of Jesus, then I want you to imagine this. There's two armies here. There's the army of God with Gideon that we saw in the Old Testament, and there's the Midianite army. You might still be in that Midianite army. You're not a believer yet. Your numbers are overwhelming, and you think we've got safety in our numbers. We're going to be okay. But not against God's army. Not against God's army. If you are a believer and you've been sitting out on the bench thinking, you know something, they've got this, and you want to run in at the last minute like the other tribes did after the battle was won, we need you here on the battlefield. The victory has already been won. This is not about winning a physical fight against a physical enemy like Gideon. We're in a different kind of a fight against the spiritual powers of evil itself, darkness and evil. You want to know where it is? Turn the TV on. Look at the news any day of the week. You'll see it there. You'll see thousands, no, you'll see millions of people who need to know that God wins. Join his side or remain in the Midianite army that has no chance against the power of God. If you're still not convinced, we want to talk to you. We want to talk to you. We want you to know that as long as you're in the army of God, you win. You win, not because of you, but because of him. If you're not in the army of God yet, join us. We invite you to join us today